钱，一块一块一块钱，一块一块一块钱，一块钱，一块一块一块钱，一块一块一块钱，一块一块一块钱，一块钱。
老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱
？2块2块2块钱，2块2块2块钱，2块2块2块钱，2块钱，2块2块2块钱，2块2块2块钱，2块2块2块钱，2块钱。
老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱
？3块3块3块钱，3块3块3块钱，3块3块3块钱，3块钱。
老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱？
很多很多很多钱，很多很多很多钱，很多很多很多钱，很多钱，很多很多很多钱，很多很多很多钱，很多很多很多钱，很多钱。
老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱？The song that you just heard is from Chinese Buddy. It's a YouTube channel that makes Mandarin Chinese easy and fun to learn for children. Good day. Today we are going to discuss what is SLA, or Second Language Acquisition, as part of Lesson 3.1 under the subject ELST 102, or the Theories of Language and Language Acquisition. Before we proceed, let me introduce to you the members of our group. We have Katherine L. Dapar. She's studying MagDev, or Master of Agricultural Development, major in language teaching, and she's based in Alicia, Bohol. The second member of our group, and equally intelligent and beautiful, is Anne, or Mary Ann B. Rodriguez. She's studying her MS in language teaching, and Anne is based in Baybay City, Leyte. And yours truly, I'm Cris Evert L. Ruffolo. I'm also studying a Master of Agricultural Development, major in language teaching, and I'm currently based in Liloan, Cebu. For this discussion on what is second language acquisition, we have the following lesson objectives. Define and explain second language acquisition, distinguish first language from second language, and to enumerate and briefly discuss diversity in the realm of second language acquisition. Now, the content flow is actually based on the graphic organizer that we also submitted in connection to this lesson. We will begin with defining what is second language acquisition, and then we will proceed with understanding approaches to SLA, and these two topics I will be discussing. And then Kat will discuss what is second language, or what is a second language, by defining what is L2. And then Anne would come in to discuss about what is a first language, and she would also discuss the diversity in learning and learners. And then I would come in again to summarize or wrap up the discussion. Okay, so let's begin. When we talk about second language acquisition, we are actually talking about the study of individuals and groups who are learning a language subsequent to learning their first one as young children. So it is a study of individuals and groups. Now, aside from being a study, it is also the process of learning the language. So the additional language is called a second language, or it is abbreviated as L2. even though it may actually be your third, your fourth, your fifth, or even your 10th language. Now, when we talk about second language acquisition, when we talk about the second language, it is commonly called as a target language, which refers to any language that is the aim or goal of learning. So, the scope of second language acquisition includes informal learning that takes place in the naturalistic context. It can also be formal learning, which can take place in classrooms, or it could be a mixture of learning inside the classroom and learning in the informal context or in the naturalistic context. I think one concrete example is when I was studying Mandarin Chinese in Shanghai at Fudan University. I was studying basically all aspects of Mandarin Chinese. So I had subject on listening, Ting Li, Ting Du, which was comprehension. I had Go Yu, which was spoken. I also had subjects on Hanzi, which was writing, Chinese calligraphy, and as well as subjects on Chinese politics, economics, and culture. Now, when I was learning the language, inside the classroom, I was taught grammar, I was taught pronunciation, I was taught how to do speed reading. But then when I went out of the classroom, when I would buy from the public market, or when I would ride transportation, that was the example of how I was learning the language in the informal way, learning it in the classroom with my professors or my teachers in the different subject areas. That was the formal context. And what I was able to experience while I was studying Mandarin Chinese in Shanghai was that it was a mixture of formal learning in the classroom and informal learning when I was learning to speak the language and as well as the culture when I engage with the people in Shanghai. Okay, now when we try to understand the process of second language acquisition, we are actually seeking to understand three basic questions. So, what are these three basic questions? So, number one is what exactly does the L2 learner or the second language learner come to know? Okay, and then the second one is that how does the learner acquire this knowledge? And the third one is why are other learners or some learners more successful than others? So, in the process of understanding second language acquisition, these are three basic questions that we either ask ourselves or we can use to discuss with other learners or other teachers. I would even venture to say that these are not just basic questions, but relevant questions to ask ourselves when we learn a language or when we are teaching learners to speak, read, or write a language. Okay, second language acquisition has already emerged as a field of study in the different perspectives of linguistics, in psychology, and even in sociology. So, and that happens because it is a result of the efforts to answer the questions that we earlier mentioned. These are the questions on what, how, and why. Because second language acquisition is a multidisciplinary approach, it also follows that in studying the SLA phenomenon, there are corresponding differences emphasized by each field. So, for example, in the field of linguistics, linguists emphasize the characteristics of the differences and similarities in the language that are being learned. So, for example, the linguistic competence or kanang imuhang underlying knowledge or what you know about the knowledge and the linguistic performance or the actual production of the language of learners are different, no, at various stages of acquisition. So let me show this video. This is quite funny but I think this aptly describes what I am talking about.
You're standing in real life and there's another person in front of you. You finally have a chance to use the language and then you have nothing to say.
Right? So, daghan na ta ana siguro no nga mga experiences ako murag kahinumdum ko ani nga kanang naning man jud kay ko pag eskwela na ko Chinese, and then I already memorize everything, like how do I actually say pila mani in Chinese. And then when I was already there, magpalit na kong kamatis, tongue-tied. So my underlying knowledge or my linguistic competence, which is my underlying knowledge, kanang naa siya diha, but the actual production or my linguistic performance medyo sablay, so linguists would emphasize that, the characteristics of the differences and similarities in the languages that are being learned. Now, in the case of psychologists and psycholinguists, they would emphasize the mental or the cognitive processes involved in acquisition and the representation of languages in the brain. So, to further understand that, so in order for us to understand that, let me show you this TEDx video.
Hablas español? Parlez-vous français? 你会说中文吗? If you answered sí, oui, or 会, and you're watching this in English, chances are you belong to the world's bilingual and multilingual majority. And besides having an easier time traveling or watching movies without subtitles, knowing 2 or more languages means that your brain may actually look and work differently than those of your monolingual friends. So, what does it really mean to know a language? Language ability is typically measured in 2 active parts, speaking and writing, and 2 passive parts, listening and reading. While a balanced bilingual has near equal abilities across the board in 2 languages, most bilinguals around the world know and use their languages in varying proportions. And depending on their situation and how they acquired each language, they can be classified into 3 general types. For example, let's take Gabriella, whose family immigrates to the US from Peru when she's 2 years old. As a compound bilingual, Gabriella develops 2 linguistic codes simultaneously with a single set of concepts, learning both English and Spanish as she begins to process the world around her. Her teenage brother, on the other hand, might be a coordinate bilingual, working with 2 sets of concepts, learning English in school while continuing to speak Spanish at home and with friends. Finally, Gabriella's parents are likely to be subordinate bilinguals, who learn a secondary language by filtering it through their primary language. Because all types of bilingual people can become fully proficient in a language regardless of accent or pronunciation, the difference may not be apparent to a casual observer. But recent advances in brain imaging technology have given neurolinguists a glimpse into how specific aspects of language learning affect the bilingual brain. It's well known that the brain's left hemisphere is more dominant in analytical and logical processes, while the right hemisphere is more active in emotional and social ones. Though this is a matter of degree, not an absolute split. The fact that language involves both types of functions, while lateralization develops gradually with age, has led to the critical period hypothesis. According to this theory, children learn languages more easily because the plasticity of their developing brains lets them use both hemispheres in language acquisition, while in most adults, language is lateralized to one hemisphere, usually the left. If this is true, learning a language in childhood may give you a more holistic grasp of its social and emotional contexts. Conversely, recent research showed that people who learned a second language in adulthood exhibit less emotional bias and a more rational approach when confronting problems in the second language than in their native one. But regardless of when you acquire additional languages, being multilingual gives your brain some remarkable advantages. Some of these are even visible, such as higher density of the gray matter that contains most of your brain's neurons and synapses, and more activity in certain regions when engaging a second language. The heightened workout a bilingual brain receives throughout its life can also help delay the onset of diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia by as much as 5 years. The idea of major cognitive benefits to bilingualism may seem intuitive now, but it would have surprised earlier experts. Before the 1960s, bilingualism was considered a handicap that slowed a child's development by forcing them to spend too much energy distinguishing between languages, a view based largely on flawed studies. And while a more recent study did show that reaction times and errors increase for some bilingual students in cross-language tests, it also showed that the effort and attention needed to switch between languages triggered more activity in, and potentially strengthened, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that plays a large role in executive function, problem solving, switching between tasks, and focusing while filtering out irrelevant information. So, while bilingualism may not necessarily make you smarter, it does make your brain more healthy, complex, and actively engaged. And even if you didn't have the good fortune of learning a second language as a child, it's never too late to do yourself a favor and make the linguistic leap from hello to hola, bonjour, or ni haos. Because when it comes to our brains, a little exercise can go a long way.
What we learned from the video is that when the brain is learning languages simultaneously, it actually makes for a healthy brain because it exercises the brain. And that's a field that psychologists and psycholinguists would look into. Okay, so in the field of social linguistics, the social linguists would emphasize variability in learner linguistic performance and then extend the scope to study the communicative competence. So what is communicative competence? We are talking about underlying knowledge that additionally accounts for language use or pragmatic competence. So you have that knowledge of the language and then you use that in communicating to a certain community or a certain audience. Now, similarly, the social psychologists would emphasize group-related phenomena such as identity and social motivation and the interactional and larger social context of learning. So we're talking now not just conversations between people, but actually it involves society already. I think this video from the National Education Association in the States emphasizes this and explains this succinctly to us.
I came to America when I was 3 years old.
I came in kindergarten, I didn't know any English.
I was usually placed in the back of the room, given crayons.
Myself, I felt like I didn't belong.
Basically, I was mainly on my
I
own.
had a hard time, I didn't know what was going on.
Even as a child, it was unfair to me. It felt like it wasn't right.
Personally, it was strange and difficult at the beginning.
I was never asked, to share what I had. I knew a lot. I mean, when I was sitting there and students were doing, writing numbers or adding and subtracting, I knew what they were doing. I just couldn't be a part of it because I didn't speak the language. And so I felt like essentially I was punished, for not speaking my first language. And it almost made my language something not to be desired.
In Vietnam, my mom didn't have any education, so she didn't know how to, teach me at home.
My parents, even though they didn't speak English, they were always very supportive of us and helped us at home, made sure we had food and clothing, shelter, and their support.
Eventually, I was able to make new friends and started to dominate the language, and that helped me to fit in.
NEA has a program that not only addresses English language learners, but it also addresses the culture piece of it and the equity to provide the teachers access for them to be successful. Many of the youngsters are coming in with very limited English speaking vocabulary and literacy skills, and the educators are reaching out for professional specific strategies that will assist them in the reading, writing, and math. Our English language learners bring a huge amount of assets, and more specifically, they bring in a wealth of what they bring in from their families, their culture, and they also help to teach our teachers, our educators. and the leadership.
When they walk into our classrooms, they're not empty vessels. You know, in the past we used to our goal was to fill them with knowledge because we assumed they didn't have any. Today we know better. Today we understand that they are rich, their experiences are valued. I think that one of the most important things about this training is to have the awareness of our English language learners and to make sure that we're meeting their learning needs, that we are aware not only of who they are, but what they need us to do for them so that they are academically successful.
ELLs or English language learners do not come to the classroom with nothing to offer. They have not only funds of knowledge, but also they come with plenty of understanding of how to work in a classroom.
ELL children bring a lot of diversity that just enriches the classroom. Everyone has their own culture and they bring their traditions to share with one another. So they do have experiences and we can all learn from things that they, you know, come with from whichever country they're from.
I think it's important for the teachers to know because as a second language learner myself, I can make connections to my students. But some teachers don't speak another language, so they go to school and they learn it this way. And this probably opened up their mind to different strategies and different way to connect to their students. And what I would tell my parents during parent conference or when they have concerns about their child, and they would tell me, oh, I don't teach them Spanish at home. I go, no, 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 no. I want you to teach them Spanish at home because I want them to make that connection.
The most meaningful thing for me that a teacher could do for a child is make them feel welcome and make them feel valued and appreciate who they are, where they come from, to as much as possible allow them to feel like they are an important part of your classroom because they have a lot to contribute and they have a lot to share if you just explore a little bit and allow them to, you know, to bring out the best in themselves.
We train them, right? That's another way of programming. Good job.
So what we learned, for example, from this video is that when you're learning a language, it's not just about the language per se, but it's also about culture and equity and access to learning. Still under the topic on understanding approaches to SLA are the applied linguists, no? Or who are in the field of applied linguistics. They specialize in SLA and they may take any one or more of these perspectives, but they're also often concerned with the implications of theory and research for teaching second languages. How is second language acquisition connected, or the implication of this in the area of theory and research? So that's applied linguistics. Now, for each discipline or sub-discipline, they use different methods for gathering and analyzing data in research on SLA. No? They employ different theoretical frameworks, and with that, it means that they would also reach different interpretations and different conclusions. Okay, so that's why the understanding about second language acquisition is akin to the story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. So if you look at the illustration, for example, one blind man said, who was touching the ear of the elephant, said, "Oh, it's a fan." Other one touched the tusk and said, "Ooh, it's a spear." The other one touched the nose and said, "It's a snake." Another blind man touched one of the foot or the leg and said, "It's a tree." Another one touched the body and said, "It's a wall." And then the 6th blind man was touching the tail and said, "It's a rope." So what we're seeing here are different perspectives according to what part of the elephant they were touching. So this is comparable to second language acquisition, to our understanding of second language acquisition, because each field or discipline or sub-discipline of second language acquisition in our quest to understand SLA may seem to conflict because, again, these are different disciplinary perspectives. So they have different research findings, they have different interpretations. A satisfactory account of second language acquisition does not isolate these perspectives, but rather integrates these different perspectives so that we do not only see individual parts, but a collaborative interpretation and research finding of a whole. And that way, I think that also makes second language acquisition such a dynamic and an interesting field to study. Next up, we are going to discuss what is a second language, and I will turn you over to my groupmate, Kat. Kat, take it away.
Thank you, Cris, for that introduction. Now, as for me, I am assigned to discuss what is a second language in this video presentation. Now, a second language, or L2, is also known as target language. I think this is called target language because this is your goal language. This is the language you want to eventually be fluent in speaking. It is also necessary for us to distinguish the function that L2 will serve in our lives because this may significantly affect what we learn. So for people or for an individual who is trying to learn a second language, it's very important and necessary for him to understand or to put by heart the importance of learning a second language because it will be the basis in considering what to learn or what needs to be learned in second language acquisition. And also, these differences may determine the specific areas of vocabulary knowledge we need, the level of grammatical complexity we have to attain, and whether speaking or reading skills are more important. Now, I will show you a video. This is a video of Grace Kim. She is Korean and she's trying to actually learn two languages aside from Korean language. So she is already fluent in English, but then they moved to Saudi and now she's trying to learn how to speak Arabic. So this is a 5-minute video, so please watch the video. And then we'll try to discuss what the video is all about.
안녕하세요. Marhaba. Hello. I am living in a multicultural life. I'm from a Korean family, but I was born in the States and lived there until I was 5. Then I moved to Saudi, which was a totally new environment to me. Flowing around these various cultures, I got interested in languages. Currently, I'm learning Arabic. It is fascinating, but hard at the same time. Arabic is nothing like the languages I've been speaking with. But I found out that my struggle is not only because of the difference between them. It's also because I want to speak it fluently. In summary, I want to be fantastic, though I have no idea of it. So, how can you speak a really different language but still be good? Thinking of my own experience, I found 3 steps. But before I dig into the steps, I want to ask you a question. Learning a foreign language is hard, right? But why is that? Yes, it could be because of the different sounds, different letters, and different grammar structure. But is that all? In my opinion, the biggest reason is because people are afraid to be wrong. And that is the first step. Not to be afraid of failure. Be wrong. Make mistakes. Fail. You should not be ashamed of those. This is an important step because by failing, you can make great progress. Don't believe me? Then listen to my story. Once I had to write a word in Arabic, meaning achievement, but I accidentally wrote a word that meant excretion. Eventually, I failed writing that word. But you know what? I never forgot those words. It's just stuck in my head. And this is how I realized that learning from failure is much more efficient than just mechanical memorization. Also, it's not only me that's saying this. Experts also prove this too. According to Harvard Business Review, managers in the vast majority of enterprises such as financial services, product design, hospitals, and even NASA's space shuttle program genuinely wanted their organizations learn from failure to improve future performance. Never forget that failure is nothing to be ashamed of. You learn from it. The second step is to find a guide. Failure helps you learn, but you do need someone to help you out with your mistakes. My guide is my Arabic teacher. She helps me through my learning process. But of course, it is definitely okay though you don't have a language teacher. Look around. People would love to teach you their native language. For example, like me. If any of you want to learn Korean, I would be more than glad to help you. To people, the fact itself that a foreigner is trying to learn their language makes them delighted. So look around and find a guide. Finally, the last step is to be passionate. Passion is powerful. Sometimes you might get down when you find something challenging. For example, I found it really tough to learn the two forms of words in Arabic, feminine and masculine. It was also hard to understand why they divided word into two groups. Why couldn't they just keep it the same for everyone, like other languages? But as I got to know Arabic better, some part of it just helped me understand. To me, Arabic is like a bridge that connects me with a really different culture. And I guess that is why I'm passionate about it. Just remember, when you're full of passion, there is nothing that can stop you from meeting your goal. Learning a language is difficult, but when you're not afraid to fail, find someone to help you out, and be passionate, you will be more than ready to learn or speak a foreign language. Shukran, thank you, 고맙습니다.
Okay, so that video was about the steps on how to learn a second language. So Grace Kim mentioned 3 very important factors that you need to understand and you need to also learn in learning a second language. So the first part, or the first factor is you have to not be afraid on learning a second language. The next step is you have to have a guide in learning it. And also the third one is you have to be passionate. Now, this is true. This is very true because as for me, when I started learning English, this is not how I speak when I was in high school or even when I was in college. I was very afraid to speak in front of so many people, especially when I was in college because I had inferiority complex. But when I had an experience working in a call center industry, that's when I was able to conquer this fear and was able to speak like this. I'm not saying that I speak fluently, very, very fluently, but I am now able to converse and to express what I want to say in terms of speaking English. And also, back when I was working in the call center industry, I had a guide. So I remember this one teammate, she's been working, I mean, she's been there for more than 2 years already, and I was just starting. So when I was on training, we had to listen to calls, and then we have to observe what the agents are doing when taking calls. So this one teammate I had, uh, she was really, I mean, I liked listening to her because her speaking was really prominent. I mean, when I was listening to her, I would say that the way she speaks is already similar to an American native. So that's one guide for me. And then another thing is when I finish after finishing work or after duty, I always watch movies. I watch movies, and then when I mean, if that movie has a good line or something, a good script, I would imitate how the actress or the actor is speaking it. So, and also, I am really passionate. I mean, my heart belongs to speaking the language. My heart belongs to speaking English ever since I was a kid. I like listening to it. I like Americans speaking, how they speak. It's like a song for me. It's like my favorite food that I could not live without. The following are distinctions commonly made as recorded in literature. So, a second language is typically an official or societally dominant language needed for education, employment, and other basic purposes. It is often acquired by minority group members or immigrants who speak another language natively. In this more restricted sense, the term is contrasted with other terms in this list. So it's very obvious that a second language acquisition has two purposes mentioned in the slide. So, number one is for education. This is very common for exchange students. So, for a student who wants to study abroad, he or she is trying to learn the language that the people in that country where he or she is studying is speaking. And also, another thing is for employment. So, in my case, when I was in the call center industry, if I did not have basic knowledge or basic skill in speaking English, I would not have been hired in that position. So this time I will show you another video. This is a video of a Filipino. She is based in Quebec in Canada. This region in Canada, this part of Canada is a French speaking region. So what she does is teaches Filipino the basic of the French language.
I know that there's not a lot of Filipino who can speak French so fluently. So to be able to share that knowledge is really gratifying for me.
Philippine-born Leonora Laput immigrated to Canada with zero knowledge of French. But after getting lost on a bus in her early days in Quebec, she vowed to learn the third language she now can fluently speak.
It was one of the many reasons why I decided to really learn French, because I told myself that if I were to live here and stay here, and if I want to work in the future, I will really have to learn the language. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for me.
That experience motivated the French-speaking Filipino-Canadian to create Mag-French Tayo, an informal online class for Filipinos who wants to learn French and learn it for free.
I simply want to help my compatriots to learn the basics of the language, to help them build their self-confidence and really to motivate them to get out of that safe haven or their comfort zone and start making short conversations with their colleagues, their friends, and their family in French.
She now works as Tagalog, English, and French interpreter, but she gives up family time on Friday and Saturday evenings to teach Filipinos struggling with the language, but who are more than willing to contribute and participate in their French-speaking communities.
Some of them arrive here with zero knowledge. Some of them were able to study and take up French lessons in the Philippines before they came here. So it varies really, but most of them are temporary workers, and they really need this lesson to be able to converse with their colleagues and their friends here in Quebec. It would be very nice if, some of them will be able to learn and become fluent in French through my lessons.
In Montreal, Ron Gagalak, City News.
So that video was about a Filipino. Again, she's based in Quebec, and she is giving a free online class for Filipinos in Quebec, Canada, for them to learn the basics of speaking French. Moving on, one distinctive terminology under second language acquisition is what we call a foreign language. This is one not widely used in the learner's immediate social context, which might be used for future travel or other cross-cultural communication situations, or studied as a curricular requirement or elective in school, but with no immediate or necessary practical application. When I was still studying in college, although I was not able to take this course, but I heard some of those who were ahead of me, even if their course is not relating to language, but one of the minor subjects they had to take was Spanish. So they had to take Spanish, even if their course is relating to math. I'll show you another video. This is a video of a little girl. She's American, and she has, I think that's her yaya, asking her to speak Tagalog. So it's a funny video. So let's watch this.
Anong pangalan mo?
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Goldsmith.
Ilang taon na si Charlotte?
Nearly 4.
Saan ka nakatira?
W Court, Strawberry Bay.
Anong pangalan nanay mo?
Megan.
Pangalan ni tatay?
Christian.
Saan ngayon si tatay?
In Macau.
Si nanay?
At work.
Saan ang work ni nanay?
In Central.
Wow, very good, Bini. Kantahin mo nga yung lawa-lawa.
Ang gamayng lawa-lawa, bisa kesa sanga. Pagsabot sa ulang, gianod siya. May gawas ang adla, tubig na mala. Ug ang gamayng lawa-lawa, bisa kabalik sa sanga.
Yung leron-leron, Inday.
Liwon-liwon sinta, puno ang papaya, dala-dala guslo, sisila ng bunga, pagdali sa duno, napali ang sanga, kapus kapalawan, hubanat ng iba.
Good girl. Bilang 1 to 10. 1,
Isa,
2,
dalawa,
3,
tatlo,
4,
apat,
5,
lima,
6,
anim,
7,
pito,
8,
walo,
9,
siyam,
10.
10.
Very good, Binbin! Ano pa ang gusto mong kantahin? Ano pa?
Nanay, tatay.
O sige.
Nanay, tatay, gusto ko tinapay, ate, kuya, gusto ko kape. Lahat ng gusto ko ay susundin nyo. Anak Kali, I pipi kutin ko. Isa, dalawa, tatlo.
Yay! Say hello to the camera. Say hello. Say hello.
Hello.
Kumusta po?
Kamusta po?
Say paalam.
Paalam.
Say paalam.
Paalam.
So, what's very obvious in that video is that even if the little girl is already talking Tagalog, the accent or the way she pronounces the words in Tagalog are still very American. Another terminology under second language acquisition is what we call library language. This one functions primarily as a tool for further learning through reading, especially when books or journals in a desired field of study are not commonly published in the learner's native tongue. For library language, this is mostly used in research. There are references that are not translated to the kind of language that the researcher is looking for. So they have to learn the language of that textbook or of that reference for them to understand what they are reading. This next video I will show you is about the English language, how it started and how it began, and what are words that we still use today from the creation of the English language.
ESL Library. The English language. Most people would agree that the English language has become the lingua franca of the modern era. Approximately 1/3 of the world's population, more than 2 billion people, use English in some capacity. More than 50 countries, including the United Kingdom, Singapore, India, and Zimbabwe, list it as their official language. English consists of more than 1 million words, the most words of any language. This wealth of vocabulary can be explained by the number of influences it has had since it first evolved from its roots. The origins of the English language can be traced back to the 5th century AD, when the British Isles were invaded by the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. These 3 tribes crossed the North Sea from modern-day Germany and Denmark and brought their Germanic language with them. Before the arrival of these tribes, the people of Britain were part of the Roman Empire and spoke a Celtic language. The language of these tribes became known as Anglo-Saxon, or Old English. Some Anglo-Saxon words that we still use today are meal, sea, good, and bad. The Anglo-Saxon names of many body parts are also still in use, including eye, foot, and arm. In the 8th century AD, Britain experienced another series of invasions that lasted into the 11th century. The invaders were Vikings who came from Scandinavia. Their language, Old Norse, was similar to the Germanic language of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Some common words derived from Old Norse are sky, knife, egg, and window. In 1066, the French-speaking Normans conquered England and introduced more than 10,000 words, such as beef, juice, justice, liberty, and prison. In addition, the Normans incorporated the subject-verb-object sentence order into the language, and it soon developed into Middle English. English speakers today wouldn't understand much of spoken Old English and Middle English. However, with the invention of the printing press around 1440, spelling, punctuation, and grammar became standardized, and the elements of modern English were born. In the 15th century, Britain began to establish itself in other parts of the world and borrowed words from the peoples it interacted with. For example, the words tobacco, potato, and hammock were taken from Native American languages, while Italian provided the words volcano and spaghetti. Later, the Hindi words shampoo and pajamas entered the language when India was a British colony. English, like most languages, is constantly changing. In fact, 4,000 new words are added to the dictionary each year. While it might seem impossible to keep up with the language, speaking English makes the life of an international tourist or business person much easier. And if you're a pilot, you don't even have a choice. Since 2008, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, has required that all international pilots be proficient in English.
Now, you might wonder why we included that video in our presentation, because the English language is the most widely used or the most widely learned language in most people all over the world. Relating to the previous video I showed you is the term auxiliary language. This one is where learners need to know for some official functions in their immediate political setting or will need for purposes of wider communication. Although their first language serves most of other needs in their lives, it is also known as a constructed language. Now, what is a constructed language? A constructed language is also called an artificial language. These are languages that have been consciously devised or that has been created, usually by a single creator. They are also sometimes called planned languages or invented languages. There is one very common example of constructed language, and this is what is called Esperanto. So I'll show you a video of what Esperanto is all about.
Saluton al ĉiuj, bonvenon al Langfocus. Mia nomo estas Paul. Hodiaŭ mi volas parole pri Esperanto. Lastatempe mi studas Esperanto iomete per Duolingo. Sed kio estas Esperanto? Esperanto estas konstruita lingvo. Tio signifas, ke Esperanto ne disvolvis nature. Oni kreis ĝin. Dr. Zamenhof kreis la lingvo antaŭ 1887. Li volis krei simplan lingvon, kiu estas facile lernebla. Zamenhof sukcese konstruis lingvo, kaj tio estas sufiĉe mirinda. Kaj Esperanto estas tre facile lernebla, kompare al aliaj lingvoj. Amuza fakto, la patro de la miliardulo George Soros estis aŭtoro de literaturo en Esperanto, kaj li instruis al George Esperanton kiam li estis infano. En Esperanto estas nur 16 gramatikaj reguloj, kaj ne estas esceptoj. Ĉiu substantivo finiĝas per o, amiko, tago. Ĉiu adjektivo finiĝas per e, amica, taga. Ĉiu adverbo finiĝas per i, amike, tage. Ne estas gramatika ĝenro. Ĉiuj verboj konjugacias same. Mi lernas, mi lernis, mi lernos. Kaj la kondicia mi lernus. Ĉiuj verboj estas tiel. Vi lernas nur unu regulon kaj vi finis. Do vi progresas rapide. Amuza fakto. Estas denaskaj Esperanto-parolantoj. Iuj esperantisto parolas Esperanton kun iliaj beboj kaj infanoj. Esperanto estis bazita sur eŭropaj lingvoj. La radikoj de Esperanta vortprovizon plejparte venas de la latina kaj latindaj lingvoj. Mi estas angla lingvano kiu konas francan, do mi tuj rekonas multajn esperantajn vortojn. Ekzistas ankaŭ kelkaj germanoj kaj slavoj vortojn. Mi pensas ke eŭropanoj povas lerni Esperanton tre facile kaj estas tre amuze lerni. Sed iuj homoj diras ke la lingvoj estas tro eŭropa kaj ĝi ne estas tiel facile lernebla por ne-eŭropanoj. Amuza fakto, parolante alian lingvon antaŭ alia esperantisto estas nomata krokodilante, ne krokodilu. La problemo de Esperanto estas ke ĝi ne estas utila. Ĝi ne fariĝis la internacia lingvo. Ne estas lando aŭ urbo kie multaj homoj parolas Esperanton. Estas proksimume 2 milionoj parolantoj tutmonde, sed ili nur interkomunikas en la interreto. aŭ en renkontiĝoj de esperantistoj. Esperanto estas nur hobia lingvo. Ĉu ĝi estas bona ideo lerni Esperanton? Se vi volas lerni lingvo kiu vi povas uzi en la strato, do estas malbona ideo. Se vi amas lingvoj kaj vi volas lerni Esperanto por intereso, do estas bona ideo. Kaj se vi volas pli koni la latindaj lingvoj kaj aliaj eŭropaj lingvoj, do lernante Esperanton unue povas helpi vin. Ĉar post lernante Esperanton, vi rekonos multajn vortojn en tiuj lingvoj.
Other restricted or highly specialized functions for second languages are designated language for specific purposes. Say, for example, French for hotel management, English for aviation technology, Spanish for agriculture, language of business for journalists. The learning of these typically focuses only on a narrow set of occupation. Specific uses and function. One such prominent area is English for academic purposes. So one function or one purpose of learning a second language is basically for a type of job you are in. And the very famous example of this would be, I think I saw this somewhere, I saw a video somewhere that pilots nowadays are required to speak English. So whether you are from Korea, you are a pilot from Korea or a pilot from India, pilot from wherever the world. So one requirement for you to be hired or to get hired as a pilot is the employers have to consider that you can speak English fluently, not just speaking the basic of the English language, but you have to speak it fluently for you to be hired. Most cases, if a potential pilot or if someone applying to become a pilot and he's not able to speak English, then there's a big chance or there's a big possibility of that person not being hired as a pilot. So there you have it. That's my segment for this video presentation. And now I'll give you to Ms. Anne Rodriguez for her to discuss first language acquisition.
that is how we acquire our first language. So what is a first language? There is a need to distinguish the concepts first language, native language, primary language, and mother tongue. Although these are usually treated as roughly synonymous set of terms, they are often generalized as L1. So say for example, children who grow up in an environment in which only English is spoken and heard will acquire only English as their first language. L1 features assumed to be a language that we acquire during early childhood. It is normally begins before the age of 3 years old. And through the people who speaks to the toddler, they probably learn as they grow. By this, the children will begin putting two words to make a sentence. Acquisition of more than one language during early childhood is called simultaneous multilingualism. We mga Bisaya are considered as multilingual people because our first language is Bisaya, no? And then, as we grow, we can hear, we can watch Tagalog movies, and then we probably know how to speak Tagalog na, no? And then as we go to school, we also learn how to speak in English. A related term is sequential multilingualism.
Simultaneous multilingualism results in more than one native language for an individual, though it is undoubtedly much less common than sequential multilingualism.
And so let's go to diversity in learning and learners. When we say diversity, that is a variant, sari-saring uri. The circumstances in diversity in learning and learners under SLA takes place sometimes need to be taken into account because sometimes they are taken for granted or ignored.
Diversity in learning and learners. It is what we learned in acquiring second language and as well as how we learned from it. It is often influenced by whether the situation involves informal exposure to speakers of other languages, immersion in a setting where one needs a new language to meet basic needs of formal instruction in school.
So say for example, in a classroom, there is Waray, Filipino or Tagalog, Bisaya, English, in a diverse classroom. The teacher should incorporate a variety of photos, paper, books, so that the children or the student can understand the topic.
Because we also have to note that different learners have different learning styles, so they would acquire or learn a language in different paces, in different settings, or in different speed. So thank you, Kat and Anne, for discussing what is a second language, what is a first language, and the diversity in learning and learners. So allow me to summarize what we learned under this lesson. SLA, or second language acquisition, is the study of individuals and groups who are learning a language other than their native tongue. So aside from being a study of learning a second language, it's also the process of learning that language. Now, there are three basic questions that we need to remember when we are trying to understand SLA. One is, what exactly does the L2 learner come to know? Number two, how does the learner acquire this knowledge? And of course, number three, why are some learners more or less successful than others? Also, in the discussion on the different approaches in second language acquisition, we also learned that there is no one approach that summarizes the study and the process of SLA, because SLA is a multidisciplinary approach. That is why we say that SLA can be examined using three disciplinary perspectives: linguistic, psychological, and social. Kat discussed this that second language, or L2, is the additional language that an individual or group targets to learn. That's why it's also called target language. It is crucial to ascertain or determine what are the reasons or functions in learning L2 so that you would know as a learner what aspects do you need to focus on. In the area of discussing first language, or L1, let's remember that first language, or L1, is the language that you acquired during early childhood. So we are talking about before the age of 3 years old. And this is the language that you've been speaking as part of growing up. So on the question, why are some L2 learners more successful than others? Nga no bitaw, no? Because learning an L2, or learning a second language, is often influenced by whether the situation involves informal exposure to speakers of other languages, immersion in a setting where one needs a new language to meet basic needs, or formal instruction in school. And that depends on each learner, because each learner is unique and therefore they learn or acquire a second language differently or in different ways. With that, we'd like to end our presentation with this video. If you're still thinking, should I learn a second language? I think this video on what's the best age to learn a second language can help us.
Gemcho, that means how are you in the Indian language Gujarati. I understand it fluently, but I don't remember learning it at all. So what the heck happened? Hey guys, what's up? I'm Sapna here for D News. Learning a second language is technically referred to as second language acquisition. That's because acquisition and learning are not quite the same. Acquiring a second language is a subconscious process, but learning a second language is a conscious process based on formal instruction. Both are important. In 1967, linguist and neuroscientist Eric Lenneberg popularized the critical period hypothesis. It's a theory that proposed the best age range to acquire a new language. Lenneberg said the critical period was age 2 to 13. That's around the age you reach puberty. Now, this age range is debated by language experts, and today they prefer to call it the sensitive period instead of the critical period. That's because it's not so critical that you learn a language during that time period only. It's actually never too late. But research shows there are advantages to starting early, and here's why. Kids' brains are way better than adults when it comes to learning because of their plasticity. Their brains are just better at creating new neural pathways. It does that through the creation of new synapses, the connective junctions where one neuron talks to another using electrical and chemical signals. Shortly after birth, synapses form at a rate that's faster than any other time period in our lives. It's known as the exuberant period, where a young brain can create up to 2 million synapses every second. The number of synapses you have peaks between the ages of 4 to 8, but your brain still has a lot of plasticity until puberty. That is why exposure to language at an early age makes such a big difference. Now, although Lenneberg's critical period hypothesis states that the ideal window to acquire a language is age 2 to 13, synapses in the brain's cortex actually start forming much earlier than that, during the second trimester of pregnancy. And there's pretty convincing research that shows language development starts before a baby's even born, so it's probably never too soon for a pregnant mother to speak to her baby. And if you're past puberty, don't worry, it's not too late either. So yeah, kids' brains are more adaptable and better at making new brain connections, but adult brains are better at focusing and better at complex thought processes. In fact, adults are faster at learning a new language. So although kids are better at subconsciously acquiring a new language, adults may be better at conscious, systematic learning. And your brain is not the only thing that matters. There are external factors like who's teaching you the language, and are you around native speakers of that language? And there are internal factors like personality. If you're outgoing, you're more likely to practice and not be so afraid to make mistakes. And then there's motivation. If you enjoy learning a language, or if you really want to communicate with a hot new boyfriend or girlfriend, it sounds cheesy, but studies show you'll be more successful. There is a catch to learning a new language as an adult. The research shows you're probably not going to nail an authentic accent. No matter how hard you try, you're probably going to sound like a foreigner. But that's okay, because did you know that being bilingual could make you smarter? Trace and Alice explain in this video.
Turns out, those who spoke 2 languages or more had better cognitive abilities than what was expected based on the intelligence test they took when they were kids. Now, what's interesting is that even the participants who had learned a second language after the age of 18 had way better results.
老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？老板多少钱？这个多少钱？
一块钱，一块钱。